The conference room smelled like mahogany and ambition, but something else lingered beneath, something sour, like ink left too long in the sun. Natalie Chen stood at the head of the table, her reflection sharp in the polished surface, and watched her board of directors settle into their leather chairs with the ease of men who believed they owned the world. She'd built Vanguard Solutions from a garage startup to a billion-dollar fintech empire in 12 years. But tonight, staring at the quarterly reports spread before her, she couldn't shake the feeling that the company she'd bled for had become a stranger. The numbers didn't lie. They whispered. And what they whispered made her blood run cold.
Natalie had always trusted her instincts. They'd carried her through venture capital pitches when she was 24 and drowning in student debt, through hostile takeover attempts, through the year her mother died and she'd had to learn grief didn't pause for earnings calls. But instinct was a quiet thing, easily drowned out by confidence, by the voices of men in expensive suits who'd been doing this longer, who smiled and called her Nat, like they'd known her since childhood. She traced her finger down the third-quarter reconciliation. Revenue was up. Margins were healthy. The board had applauded her last month, raised glasses of scotch older than her career. But buried in Appendix J, a footnote she'd almost missed, was a discrepancy, a transfer of $8.7 million to a subsidiary she didn't recognize, Lightbridge Holdings. The name meant nothing. She pulled up the corporate registry on her tablet. No results, no filings, no record. Ms. Chen? Her assistant Dev appeared in the doorway, his tie slightly crooked. He was 26, brilliant with data, and made the best chai she'd ever tasted. The Callaway meeting's in 10. Cancel it, Natalie said, not looking up, and pull every financial report from the last 18 months. I want originals, not summaries. Dev's eyebrows rose, but he knew better than to question her. On it. She worked through lunch, through the golden hour when the Boston skyline turned to copper, through the moment her phone buzzed with a text from her sister asking if she'd remembered to eat. The reports arrived in a banker's box, heavy as a body. Natalie spread them across the floor of her office, searching for patterns the way she used to search for constellations with her father on summer nights in Monterey. There, another footnote, $12.3 million. Lightbridge again, and again 6 months prior. Always in the third quarter, always approved by the board in a voice vote, no individual signatures. Her office door opened without a knock. Richard Pemberton, her CFO, filled the frame. He was 58, silver-haired, with a voice like aged bourbon. He'd been her father's college roommate, the man who'd co-signed her first business loan when every bank in the state had laughed her out the door. "Burning the midnight oil?" he asked, stepping inside. His gaze swept the scattered papers. Something flickered in his expression, too quick to name. "Just catching up," Natalie said lightly. She closed the folder on her desk. "You know how it is." "I do." Richard smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Don't work too hard, Nat. You've got a whole team to rely on." When he left, she waited 5 minutes. Then she locked the door, opened her encrypted cloud drive, and began copying every document onto a private server. Her hands were steady. Her heartbeat was not. The next morning, Natalie arrived at Vanguard's headquarters before dawn. The building was a glass tower overlooking the harbor, all clean lines and reflected sky. She loved it the way you love a child, fiercely, protectively, even when it disappointed you. The security guard, Martin, waved her through with a grin. "Early bird gets the worm, Ms. Chen." "Or the truth," she murmured, too quiet for him to hear. In the records department, she found Amy Liu hunched over a terminal, her desk cluttered with coffee cups and sticky notes. Amy was Vanguard's senior compliance officer, a woman who could recite regulatory codes in her sleep and once caught a $200,000 embezzlement scheme by noticing a receptionist's new car. "Amy," Natalie said, and the other woman startled. "I need your eyes on something. Quietly." Amy's expression sharpened. "How quietly?" "Board-level quiet." They moved to a conference room on the 15th floor, windowless and soundproof. Natalie laid out the reports. Amy studied them in silence, her pen scratching notes. 5 minutes became 10. 10 became 20. Finally, she looked up. "This is a shell game. Classic mid-tier fraud. Lightbridge Holdings doesn't exist as a legitimate entity." These transfers are being routed through offshore accounts, then laundered back into, I'd need more data, but my guess, executive bonuses, maybe offshore real estate. Someone is siphoning funds and making it look like standard subsidiary operations. Natalie felt the floor tilt beneath her. How much? Amy calculated. $47 million over 3 years, give or take. The number hung in the air like smoke. Natalie thought of the employees she laid off last winter to cut costs, of the scholarship program she'd canceled because the budget was too tight. She thought of Richard's smile, of the board's applause, of trust given and betrayed. Who approved these? She asked. The board, unanimous consent every time. Amy met her gaze. Natalie, if this goes as deep as I think it does, you're not just looking at a few bad actors. You're looking at a conspiracy. Natalie stood. The city sprawled beyond the glass, indifferent and vast. Then we find proof, real proof, something airtight. And then what?
Natalie had learned patience the hard way. In the early days of Vanguard, she'd been all fire and impatience, ready to bulldoze obstacles and dare the world to stop her. Her mother had been the one to teach her restraint, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and a crossword puzzle, saying, "Rushing a solution only reveals your hand, sweetheart. Let them think they're winning until the moment they've already lost." She thought of that now as she sat across from her general counsel, Marcus Webb. He was a black man in his early 40s with close-cropped hair and a reputation for being unshakable in depositions. She'd hired him 5 years ago when he'd walked away from a partnership at a white-shoe firm because they'd asked him to bury evidence. That kind of integrity was rare. She needed it now. "You're saying the board is stealing from the company," Marcus said slowly, after she'd walked him through the findings. "Your board, the people who've been with you since the Series A?" "Not all of them. Maybe. I don't know yet." Natalie pressed her palms flat against the table. "But Richard approved every transfer. He's CFO. He had to know." Marcus was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "If you move on this and you're wrong, they'll vote you out. You know that." "I'm not wrong." "If you move on this and you're right, they'll fight like cornered animals. Lawsuits, defamation claims. They'll leak to the press that you're unstable, that the company's in chaos. Vanguard's stock will tank." He leaned forward. "Natalie, I'm with you, but you need to understand what you're risking." "I understand. I also understand that if I do nothing, I'm complicit, and I didn't build this company to be a front for theft." Marcus nodded slowly. "Then we do this right. We need a forensic accountant, someone external with no ties to Vanguard. We need to trace every dollar without tipping them off. And we need leverage, something that makes it impossible for them to retaliate. I have someone in mind. Elliot Grant. He used to work for the SEC, now he's independent. He owes me a favor. Call him." Elliot arrived 3 days later, a wiry man in his 50s with wire-rimmed glasses and the air of someone who'd seen every financial crime imaginable and still managed to be surprised by human creativity. He set up shop in a locked office on the 18th floor, surrounded by hard drives and stacks of encrypted files. Natalie brought him coffee at odd hours and watched him work, the glow of his monitors painting his face in blue light. "This is elegant," Elliot said one night, almost admiringly. "Whoever set this up knew exactly what they were doing. They used third-party vendors to create fake invoices, then routed payments through Lightbridge, which exists just long enough to clear the transfers before dissolving. The money ends up in accounts registered to trusts in the Caymans. Untraceable, unless you know where to look." "And do you?" Natalie asked. Elliot grinned. "I always know where to look." He showed her the trail. It led to 7 board members, out of 9. Richard was at the center, but he wasn't alone. James Calloway, the venture capitalist who'd championed her first funding round. Helen Zhang, the tech visionary she'd admired for years. Even Gordon Ross, the avuncular board chair who sent her birthday cards with handwritten notes. They'd been taking money for 3 years, quietly, systematically, while she built a company she thought they all believed in. Natalie felt something harden in her chest, something cold and resolute. "How much can you prove in court?" "All of it, but you'll need subpoena power, and that means going public."
She thought about that as she drove home that night, the city light streaking past her windows. Her apartment was a loft in the Seaport district, minimalist and clean, the kind of place that looked like a magazine spread and felt like a hotel. She poured herself a glass of wine she didn't drink and stood at the window watching the harbor. Her phone buzzed. A text from her sister, Claire. "Call me. I miss you." Natalie almost did. Almost told her everything, the way she used to when they were kids, and Claire was the only person in the world who didn't make her feel like she had to be perfect. But this wasn't something she could share. Not yet. Not until it was over. Instead, she opened her laptop and drafted an email to the board, carefully worded, requesting an emergency meeting to discuss financial irregularities. She scheduled it for Friday, 3 days away, enough time to finalize the evidence, enough time for them to panic, to make mistakes. She hit send and waited for the world to shift. The responses came within hours. Richard called her directly, his voice warm and concerned. "Nat, what's going on? Are you all right?" "I'm fine," she said evenly. "Just some discrepancies I want to clarify." "Discrepancies?" A pause. "What kind?" "We'll discuss it Friday." When she hung up, her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the desk and breathed. By Thursday, the tension was palpable. Board members who usually ignored her emails were suddenly eager to schedule calls. Helen Zhang showed up at her office unannounced, all smiles and concern, asking if she could do anything to help. Gordon Ross invited her to lunch and spent an hour reminiscing about the early days, about how proud he was of what she'd built. She smiled and nodded, and filed every word away as evidence of their guilt. The night before the meeting, she couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about her mother, about the way she'd fought pancreatic cancer with the same stubborn grace she'd brought to everything else, refusing to let it define her until the very end. Natalie was 29 when she died, too young to lose her and too old to pretend the world was fair. Her mother's last words were, "Don't let anyone dim your light, sweetheart, not even yourself." She wouldn't. She couldn't. Friday morning dawned cold and clear. Natalie dressed in her favorite suit, charcoal gray, sharply tailored, the armor she wore when she needed to remind herself who she was. She arrived at the office an hour early and found Marcus and Amy already there, along with Elliot and a team of 3 lawyers she didn't recognize. "Reinforcements," Marcus said. "We'll need them." At 10 o'clock, the board filed into the conference room. Richard looked calm. Helen looked curious. Gordon looked uneasy. Natalie took her seat at the head of the table and felt the weight of every decision that had led her here. "Thank you for coming. We have a lot to discuss."
The silence in the room was the kind that pressed against your ears, thick and waiting. Natalie had faced hostile rooms before, investor meetings where men twice her age dismissed her with condescending smiles, press conferences where reporters tried to bait her into sound bites. But this was different. These were people she'd trusted, people she'd celebrated with, grieved with, built something extraordinary alongside, or so she'd thought. She opened the folder in front of her. Inside were printouts of the financial trails Elliot had uncovered, each page marked with highlighter and sticky notes. She slid copies across the table to each board member, watching their faces as they registered what they were seeing. Richard picked up his copy, frowning. "Nat, what is this?" "Lightbridge Holdings," Natalie said. Her voice was calm, steady, a lake with ice forming across its surface. "A shell company that's received $47 million in transfers from Vanguard over the past 3 years, money that was approved by this board and funneled into offshore accounts." Helen Zhang leaned forward, her expression sharp. "That's absurd. Lightbridge is a subsidiary." "It's not," Natalie cut her off. "There's no corporate registration, no tax filings, no legitimate business operations. It's a front. And the money didn't go to operations, it went into your pockets." The room erupted. Gordon Ross stood, his face red. "This is outrageous. You're accusing us of fraud, embezzlement, breach of fiduciary duty?" Marcus spoke for the first time, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. We have transaction records, shell company registrations, and account statements linking 7 of you to offshore trusts in the Cayman Islands. This isn't speculation, it's evidence." James Calloway, the venture capitalist, laughed, a short, bitter sound. "You're making a mistake, Natalie, a huge one. Do you have any idea what kind of legal war you're starting?" "I know exactly what I'm doing," Natalie said. She felt something wild and bright burning in her chest, something that tasted like justice. "I'm protecting the company I built, the one you've been stealing from." Richard stood slowly. He looked older suddenly, the silver in his hair catching the light. "Nat, you don't understand. This was always part of the plan, a way to reward the people who took the risk on you when no one else would. You think you built Vanguard alone? We gave you the capital, the connections, the credibility. You gave me a loan, which I repaid, with interest. You don't get to steal just because you think you're owed more." "It's not stealing," Helen said, her voice icy. "It's compensation for years of work, of risk, of putting our reputations on the line for a company that wouldn't exist without us." "Then why hide it?" Amy asked, speaking for the first time. "Why shell companies? Why offshore accounts? If it was legitimate compensation, why not disclose it?" No one answered. Gordon Ross sank back into his chair. "What do you want, Natalie?" "I want you to resign. All of you. Immediately. You'll return the stolen funds, sign non-disclosure agreements, and walk away quietly. In exchange, I won't press criminal charges. You get to keep your reputations, your freedom, but you're done here." Richard stared at her. "And if we refuse? Then I go to the SEC, the FBI, and every major news outlet. I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what you did. Vanguard might take a hit in the short term, but it'll survive. I'll make sure of that. You, on the other hand..." She let the sentence hang. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Helen stood, gathering her papers. "You'll regret this," she said coldly. "You have no idea what you've just set in motion." "I know exactly what I've set in motion. I'm taking my company back." One by one, they left. Richard lingered, his hand on the door. He looked back at her, and for a moment, she saw the man who'd believed in her when she was just a kid with a dream and a laptop. "Your mother would be proud, even if I'm not." Then he was gone. Natalie sat alone in the conference room, her hands folded on the table. The city stretched beyond the windows, bright and indifferent. She felt hollowed out, like a tree struck by lightning, still standing but changed forever. Her sister called one evening. "I saw the news. Are you okay, really?" Natalie thought about lying, then thought about her mother, about the way she'd always said honesty was the hardest gift you could give someone. "I'm not okay," she admitted, "but I think I will be, eventually. Come home for Thanksgiving. The kids miss you. I miss you." "I'll try," Natalie said, and meant it. She hung up and stood at the window, watching the harbor lights shimmer on the water. Somewhere out there, the world was still spinning, still indifferent. But she had fought for something. She'd stood up when it would have been easier to look away. That had to count for something. It had to be enough.
Thanksgiving came wrapped in cold rain and the smell of Claire's kitchen. Rosemary, brown butter, the sweet char of roasted vegetables. Natalie stood in the doorway of her sister's house in Providence, a 2-story colonial with a crooked porch and a yard full of fallen leaves, and felt something in her chest unclench for the first time in weeks. Claire pulled her into a hug, fierce and warm. "You look terrible," she said fondly. "Thanks," Natalie said, and meant it. Claire had always been honest, even when honesty stung. The kids, Emma, 7, and Leo, 5, launched themselves at her with the kind of enthusiasm that left bruises. Natalie caught them, laughing, and let herself be dragged into the living room to inspect a Lego castle and a drawing of what might have been a dragon or possibly a dinosaur. For an hour, she forgot about board meetings and legal settlements and the hollow ache in her chest that came from realizing the people you trusted most had never really seen you at all. Dinner was loud and chaotic.
the table crowded with Claire's husband, Ben, and Claire's in-laws, and a neighbor who'd been invited because she was spending the holiday alone. Natalie sat between Emma and Leo, cutting turkey into small pieces and answering questions about whether CEOs got to wear capes. The conversation washed over her like a river, gentle and relentless, pulling her back into the world of ordinary things. After dinner, she and Claire sat on the porch with mugs of tea, wrapped in blankets against the November chill. The rain had softened to mist, the kind that clung to everything and made the streetlights glow like halos. "You want to talk about it?" Claire asked. Natalie considered. "Not really." "Okay." Claire sipped her tea. "But if you do, I'm here." They sat in silence for a while. Then Natalie said, "I trusted them. I really did. And they looked me in the eye and lied for 3 years." "I know," Claire said quietly, "and that's on them, not you." "It doesn't feel that way." "It never does." Claire reached over and squeezed her hand. "But you did the right thing. You know that, right? You could have let it go, pretended you didn't see it, protected yourself. But you didn't. You fought. That takes guts." Natalie looked at her sister, at the woman who'd raised 2 kids while working as a pediatric nurse, who balanced impossible schedules and still found time to send care packages and remember birthdays. "You're braver than I am," she said. Claire laughed. "Different kinds of brave. You fight boardrooms, I fight bedtime. Both are valid." When Natalie returned to Boston on Sunday, she felt steadier. The city greeted her with its usual indifference, all glass towers and rushing crowds, but she found comfort in that. Vanguard's offices were quieter now, the new board still finding its rhythm. She'd brought in people she admired, a former nonprofit director, a tech ethicist, a union organizer with a background in finance. They asked hard questions. They pushed back. It was uncomfortable and necessary, and exactly what the company needed. Dev met her in her office Monday morning with chai and a worried expression. "You have a visitor," he said. "Richard Pemberton. He's in the lobby." Natalie's stomach twisted. "Did he say what he wants?" "No, just that it's important." She considered turning him away. Then she thought about her mother, about closure, about the importance of looking your demons in the eye. "Send him up." Richard looked smaller than she remembered. He wore a navy suit and carried a briefcase, but something in his posture had shifted. He looked tired, human. "Natalie, thank you for seeing me." She didn't offer him a seat. "You have 5 minutes." He nodded. "I came to apologize. Not to make excuses, I know there aren't any good enough, but to tell you I'm sorry. For the lying, for the betrayal, for taking advantage of your trust." Natalie crossed her arms. "Why now?" "Because I haven't been able to sleep," Richard said quietly. "Because every time I close my eyes, I see your mother. She believed in you so much, Natalie. She used to tell me you were going to change the world. And instead of supporting that, I got greedy. I convinced myself I deserved more, that we all did. And I was wrong." Natalie felt the anger in her chest flicker, not dying but shifting into something more complicated. "You were my father's friend. I trusted you." "I know." Richard set the briefcase on her desk and opened it. Inside was a stack of documents. "This is the deed to a property in Vermont. A cabin my family's owned for 40 years. I'm signing it over to you.
It's worth about $1.2 million. It's not enough to make up for what I took, but it's a start. I've also set up a scholarship fund in your mother's name, $500,000 endowment, for first-generation college students in STEM. She stared at the papers. Why? Because I want to do one thing right. Even if it's too late. She looked at him. Really looked at him. Saw the regret etched into the lines around his eyes, the slump of his shoulders. She thought about mercy, about grace, about the fact that people were complicated, capable of both terrible betrayals and genuine remorse. I can't forgive you. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I know. But I'll accept this. For the students who need it. For my mom. And Richard, don't contact me again. If you want to make amends, do it by living better, not by asking me to absolve you. He nodded. Understood. When he left, Natalie sat at her desk and cried for the first time since the whole ordeal began. Not from sadness exactly, but from the overwhelming weight of everything. The betrayal, the fight, the small, unexpected grace of an apology she hadn't asked for, but needed to hear. Dev found her 20 minutes later, her eyes red but her posture straight. You okay, boss? Yeah. I think I am. The months that followed were a rebuilding. Vanguard launched a new transparency initiative, publishing detailed financial reports and opening channels for employee whistleblowers. Natalie gave a TED Talk about corporate accountability that went viral, not because it was flashy, but because it was honest. She talked about betrayal and resilience and the importance of building systems that valued integrity over profit. She talked about her mother. The company grew. Slowly, carefully. But it grew. New partnerships formed, employee satisfaction scores climbed, the stock price recovered. Natalie hired a VP of culture whose first act was to institute mandatory ethics training and quarterly town halls where anyone could ask her anything. On the anniversary of her mother's death, she flew to Monterey and scattered wildflower seeds at the spot where they used to watch stars. She thought about the cabin in Vermont, about the scholarship fund, about the long, winding road between justice and forgiveness. She thought about her mother's voice, warm and steady. Don't let anyone dim your light, sweetheart. She hadn't. She wouldn't. That was enough.
2 years later, Natalie stood in a conference room in Vanguard's new headquarters, a building designed with input from employees, full of light and open spaces and places for people to gather. She was presenting the annual report to a board she'd built from the ground up, people who challenged her and supported her in equal measure. The first Lightbridge Scholarship recipients sat in the audience, 5 students from across the country, first-generation college kids studying engineering and computer science. One of them, a girl named Sophia with bright eyes and a NASA hoodie, reminded Natalie of herself at 20. After the presentation, Sophia approached her. "Miss Chen, I just wanted to say thank you. This scholarship, it changed my life." Natalie smiled. "You changed your own life. We just helped clear the path." "Still," Sophia said, "it means everything." That night, Natalie drove to the harbor and sat on a bench overlooking the water. The city glittered behind her, alive and humming. She thought about the past 2 years, the fights, the rebuilding, the slow, painful work of learning to trust again. She thought about her mother, about Richard's apology, about the cabin in Vermont she'd visited once and found herself unable to sell. Her phone buzzed. A text from Claire. Emma asked if you're coming for Christmas. Please say yes. Natalie typed back, wouldn't miss it. She looked out at the water, at the way the light danced on the surface, shifting and constant. The world was complicated. People were capable of both betrayal and redemption. Trust was fragile, but so was hope, and both were worth fighting for. She'd build something good, something that mattered. And if the road had been harder than she'd imagined, well, the best things always were. Natalie stood, tucked her phone into her pocket, and walked back toward the light.